Okay, the next part of the build, it's still the right side of the frame, but it's page 8 now, which shows you mounting servo stuff, clutch stack, main bearing blocks, etc., etc. So go ahead and get the blocks out of one bag. There's another bag just below them with a bunch of 8mm screws and screw caps again, so we're going to be opening those. Now notice on the bearings, there's two of the same and then two that are different. The clutch stack bearing is clearly noticed by the fact it has two bearings, a little small one and a big one. All right, we're going to save that for the clutch stack. Then there's two that are identical, all right, and then there's one that has a little bag of tiny screws, and this is the bottom bearing block, and you're going to put these screws in this block here to secure this bearing from popping out of the block, all right? So that's what those are for. So get all this stuff out. You can go ahead and get your screws out. I might dump them in another little separate tray just to keep them separate. And then what we're going to do is put them on the frame. Now again, the blocks go on the inside of the frame, and they go way back here. There's two holes at the top. That will be one of the bearing blocks, one of these bearing blocks that isn't secured by screws. I'm going to mount them and show you the orientation, because note the orientation of the bearings. The manual clearly shows the orientation of the bearing blocks and how they go in, but I'll get them in and we'll review, okay? So I'm going to get my 3 main shaft bearing blocks on, and we'll continue on. Okay, so I've put the first 2 bearing blocks on, the top one and the middle one. Now note the orientation. Open race of the bearing, where you can see the whole bearing, is at the top of the helicopter. On the mid bearing, the open face is toward where the main gear will sit in here. Okay, so toward the bottom of the helicopter. Don't get this wrong. This is what keeps the bearing, when the mast collar is here and the main gear is here, this keeps the bearings from coming out of the blocks, all right? So let's go ahead and get those on that way. Now, I've only finger tightened the screws. You could go ahead and Loctite them now, but this is what I prefer to do. When I bolt the whole frame together, I like to run the main shaft through all 3 bearing blocks to make sure they're nice and aligned, okay? So I leave them loose for right now and unloctited, and when we go to put the whole thing together, we'll get the main shaft in there and get everything aligned. All right, so this 3rd bearing block, you want to get these tiny little screws out, use your Loctite, and you're going to put them on the side that has the open face of the bearing. This keeps the bearing from coming out of the bearing block. You'll notice there are holes on the other side, but the screws will be useless if you put them in that side. All right, so let's get these 4 screws in, and we'll put it on the frame, and we'll come back and review its orientation. Okay, so there we have it. So again, open face, all right? This lower one with the 4 screws that secure it, open face up toward the main gear, all right? So don't get those in wrong. Again, cap screws, but finger tight. We'll Loctite those and tighten it down when we put the 2 frame halves together. Okay, so next up we need to build the clutch bearing bell assembly. So out of this bag, go ahead and get your starter shaft coupler, your pinion, your clutch bell, and we'll go ahead and get that together. Okay, we've got the clutch bell and everything out. Now, the liner's already pre-installed. Again, we've got our bearing block for this. Also, at this point, if you're going to use magnets and a governor sensor, then you want to put the magnets in now. Now, I've got other videos that tell you to install the magnets, but remember, you want to put 2 magnets in so that the bell's balanced, and you want to make sure that one magnet has one pole up one way and the same pole down in this one. If you get both with the same pole in the same direction, your governor's not going to work. The way I like to do that is stick the 2 magnets together, mark the ends with ink, and then when you put them apart, put the ink sides up. That makes sure you get one pole one way, one pole the other way, all right? And go ahead and glue them in with epoxy. Some people use CA. Anyway, I'm not going that route. I really like the Spectrum sensor, backplate sensor, so I'm going to use the Spectrum backplate sensor on this build, simply because it's just much more convenient. You're not trying to adjust a sensor and all kinds of other stuff. Just my preference, okay? All right, so now we want to Loctite, clean this up. I've already cleaned it up. Clean up the bell, okay? And we want to Loctite this onto the bell. Now, the easy way to do this, or the way I find to do it, and I've done this on other builds, is to tighten this up. You'll find a regular pair of pliers has these gripping teeth in the middle, and they fit the pinion pretty well. All right, now I recommend, unless you're careful, that you wrap a rag around this and grab it with those teeth, all right, and then tighten it up. You don't want to mar these teeth. You're going to be getting noise from your pinion to main gear. All right, so wrap a rag around that, tighten it up as best as you can. You don't have to go like super ballistic, but go ahead and get that on there. We'll come back and continue. Okay, pinion on, and you look at this bearing block, you know, small bearing, large bearing, pretty straightforward. Go Goes on like that. All right, then you're going to take your starter shaft. Notice there's a flat spot in the starter shaft. See that? Okay, you're going to feed that up through the small bearing in the clutch bell, up through the stack. Then you're going to put your starter coupler on and get that set screw lined up with the flat spot in the shaft. Now what you want to do is have this all pinched together so there's no run out. I mean, the slot's big enough where if you leave this a little bit loose, you can get what's called run out, okay, where the whole system can move on the starter shaft. So you want to pinch those together and then tighten that set screw. All right, let's go ahead and get that together and we'll get it on the frame. Okay, so there we have it, system together. It's free and there's no run out in the system, so the bearing block can't move this way. All right, we're going to bolt this on the inside of the frame. You'll see the two holes right here. They're slotted, so this means that there's an adjustment here later to get the clutch stack aligned with the motor. So once again, get your 8mm out, 2 caps, finger tight for now, no Loctite. We'll get that all tightened up when we align things. So go ahead and get that on, and we'll continue on. Okay, clutch bell on, that's the way it goes. Again, we left it for adjustment. Okay, the next step is we're going to put on the servo brackets onto the frame. And the way they go is one goes on the top like so, okay, and you're going to need 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, they'll clearly line up. And then one goes down here on the bottom. Now you'll notice, once again, these bottom holes are slotted. So we're going to break out these self-tapping screws with the nice little washers, fancy washers, and we're going to go ahead and tighten the top one since it's not adjustable, but we're going to leave the bottom one set loose so we can adjust this for our servos later. All right, so let's go ahead and get that on. We'll come back and review. Okay, there they go. There we go on the frame. So again, the 8 self-tapping screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 self-tappers. They go into plastic. You don't use Loctite on those. It's not good for plastic. Top ones are tight because they're not adjustable. Bottom ones I left a little loose so we could adjust for different servos. Okay, so we got those on. Next, and we're almost done with page 8. Next is the battery tray, servo tray, whatever this is going to mount, receiver stuff. And it's going to mount on here like so. There's 3 holes, 1, 2, 3. Okay, you're going to mount it like so. 3 self-tappers and washers. Now this part came with its own self-tappers and washers. They're identical to these self-tappers and washers. As you can see, we're getting quite an array of screws out that will be used on the other half of the frame. So once again, I'm just going to leave these bagged up since it keeps them nice and neat, and use the screws that would be used on the other half of the frame now to mount this. You'll need 3 of them. And then later, when we go to put the other frame halves together, I'll just open this bag and use those. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. Let's go ahead and get that on there, and we'll continue on. Okay, that's going to finish page 8 of the manual. Okay, page 8. We've got the clutch stack, all the bearings on, etc., etc. As you can see, battery tray, servo trays, things like that. So we're all done with page 8.